Thanks, Matt, for that introduction, and thank you, VMEX Protocol. Could I hear you guys' names one more time? Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, my name's Jay.
I'm Jonto.
Jay and Jonto. All right, awesome. Thank you guys for joining us. Today we will be discussing VMEX Finance and your protocol and how Rocket Pool might be able to leverage it on the Optimism protocol. VMEX is a lending protocol with some unique characteristics, namely its isolated tranche mechanism where similar assets can be grouped together by the DAO for their LTV ratios. So this is something that we will dive further into detail later on. But for now, how about you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what VMEX is and what is unique about it?
Yeah, I can kick it off with an introduction of myself and then let Jonto, and then we can go into a little bit about the VMEX stuff. So, Jay, my background, prior to crypto is in math and economics. I spent a little time doing computational biology research and then spent a couple years doing data science for investment firms. I caught the crypto bug back in 2016-17. Eventually got up the courage to leave my old job and started working in crypto full-time, helping out across some DeFi protocols. And then about 8 months or so ago, maybe a little bit more, started kind of formulating the idea of VMEX and what we were thinking was kind of missing in the lending protocol space and how we could fill those gaps. And so we started to pull together the team. And yeah, now here we are. I'll let Jonto give a quick intro on his end.
Yeah, real quick. Pre-crypto was working in fintech, mostly software for hedge funds. Kind of had a whole career there, and then left in 2018 to go full-time DeFi. Was kind of an individual contributor across the DeFi space for a little while, and then was at Badger DAO for a few years, and then have also been contributing at Zero Network, which is a Bitcoin bridge being built out right now. And yeah, heard what Jay was working on. Kind of were across each other's networks last year, and kind of came on to help them build it out. And now we're here, getting close to launch.
Very cool stories.
Yeah, I can give a kind of quick walkthrough on VMEX. Then we can dive into any more specifics that you find interesting. But yeah, at a high level, VMEX is it's an over-collateralized lending protocol that's using this risk-isolated lending pool structure. So you can kind of think of it as an Aave factory where each individual lending pool, or what we're calling tranches, is kind of its own instance of a lending protocol. The goal being really that we thought, there's this massive base of underused assets in DeFi, specifically high quality assets staked in other protocols like LP tokens and vault tokens that are pretty prime assets to be borrowed against because they're earning interest, they're underlying safe assets. But because of the structure of traditional lending protocols like Aave and Compound, for example, with a kind of single monolithic lending pool, that pool inherits all the risk of the assets added. And so we were like, okay, if we want to support all these assets, we have to basically separate them, by their risk, which is, where the name tranche came from, and isolate things that are high risk into their own pool. So if something happens, it's isolated to that pool and it's not impacting other pools. So a big focus for us is on kind of unlocking these LP tokens and vault tokens, interest-bearing assets as collateral on our protocol, so people can borrow against them, lever up to earn higher yield. It's kind of where it kind of rolls into rETH and all that sort of stuff that we can get to, and kind of unlock these assets that you can't borrow against in most other places, where we take a very different approach from people who've done kind of permissionless lending protocols in the past. Is we're permissionless with an asterisk, where we've built out a pretty sophisticated risk management framework and simulation tools, with the goal being basically that the DAO or the risk committee, when it's formed, will be the ones setting all the asset-specific risk parameters for the assets, configuring oracles. Assets will have to go through an approval process where they have to have enough liquidity. It's not as simple as a lending or a DEX where you can just permissionlessly list assets and people trade against them, because when you're listing these, they have to be liquidated. And so there's all these aspects of an asset that makes it safe to be borrowed or used as collateral. And so we'll kind of handle all that process for users or for people who want to create tranches, just so there's more confidence in the assets being added and making the protocol a safer place. So hopefully we it's walking that very fine line between permissionless and strictly controlled. There will be this aspect of verified tranche admins that will be kind of trusted third parties or other protocols that have some sort of control to fine tune risk parameters or make it more efficient for their pool. But yeah, that's kind of the super high level gist. Jonto, I'm not sure if you want to fill anything else.
No, I think that pretty much covers it. It's really just high level. It's kind of creating more of a structure, so we can have more people, a lot of people to do what they do better. It shouldn't be that every lending protocol has to have like this robust, risk management team. So what we've really built out is the ability for there to be pool admins, and that can be people who are very focused on risk management, to kind of come and kind of take their own approach on how they want to structure the pool. And then this can be built out and kind of like let the market decide. As Jay said, what we're focusing on as the VMEX organization and DAO initially is kind of working towards the automated side of that. So how can we take away the guesswork around parameter setting and things like that? Take the data, take it on-chain data, process it, and figure out how can we make these things more like robo pools almost, where you can get close to permissionless pool management, but it's within set parameters. The permissionless part's just you're able to permissionlessly add things to the pool as long as they meet certain parameters. So that's kind of what we're working towards. It can take a while to get there, but we hope that's really the differentiator, and where it fits in with Rocket Pool obviously is rETH itself, the asset, and then like Jay mentioned, our initial focus is high quality assets in LP that you can't currently borrow against. So things like rETH and ETH on Velodrome or Uniswap, or I guess Aura's coming, Balancer Beats. If you're talking specifically about
right.
optimism, things like that. That's what we're really focused on.
Awesome. That's a very interesting approach. It almost reminds me of like a Yearn meets an Euler, where you're trying to get the permissionless side of lending protocols with the security of like an admin team that is still sort of permissionless. Could you compare it to the Yearn strategy system, where anyone could create a strategy that then people could deposit into the vault? You mentioned that there would be third-party, semi-permissioned people involved. How exactly do they fit in?
Yeah, so the semi-permissioned piece is, so basically how it'll be structured is anyone can come along and create a lending pool or a tranche on VMEX. And so there's really kind of three groups of people. There's just your external users who have very limited controls. They can create a pool, they can select from a drop-down of supported assets that's already been pre-approved, and then they just kind of take the risk parameters we give them, they take the oracles that we've created, and then they can create their pool. And so they can play around with the mixture of assets in a pool and that type of stuff, but there's very limited control there. The other big category is VMEX the DAO, which is kind of the global admin setting risk parameters, approving assets, creating custom oracles for assets that need them, doing all this type of stuff. And then the third bucket is the kind of like verified tranche admin. And so these are the more permissioned actors. And so the idea is that these are probably going to be trusted protocols. And so, for example, Rocket Pool could be a verified admin. They could have some controls over their risk parameters for their pool, and so they could, for example, create like a Rocket Pool tranche. They could say, okay, we want rETH in the pool, and we only want to allow people to borrow USDC and ETH against it, and then we can fine tune the LTV and the interest rate curves for those assets, so it's like super efficient to lever up on rETH or do something like that. And so that's kind of where the third bucket of people comes in. It's like these really trusted third-party protocols, or eventually it could be individuals who are really trusted on kind of the risk management front, to basically create a pool, a lending pool that's like fine-tuned to what they want to do with it. In doing that,
Yeah, it makes sense.
drive their community to it, and then they can also capture a share of the revenue earned by that pool. And so we'll split 50-50 any revenue that's earned between VMEX DAO and the verified tranche admin operator. And so you can kind of like use our framework to create your own mini lending protocol, if you will.
So I'm thinking it like if I was a Chaos Labs or a Gauntlet or one of these other risk management organizations that don't actually have their own protocol, they just specifically focus on risk management. VMEX seems like a pretty good fit because now they can come in, and since they just focus on fine-tuning parameters, VMEX can just handle the implementation. So they seem like a good category, good fit for that category. As you mentioned, Rocket. Yep. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna agree. I think that's a really cool idea and something we've been talking a little bit about, and would love to see people like Gauntlet and Chaos Labs to do something like this, where like they can basically showcase how good they are, and they can compete, like on tuning parameters, and whether it's more of a thought experiment or if they actually get traction, they can basically be verified tranche admins, select the assets they want to support, really fine tune them. They could create their own stable swap pools and adjust parameters so they think they're optimal for what's going on, and do a lot of that stuff. I think would be super cool to see, and also a great way for them to kind of show off their expertise, and kind of use as a testing ground for other protocols too.
Yeah, totally echo that. I want to talk a little bit about the isolated nature of the lending pools. Are these so? Say we had a Aave, for example. Aave has the E mode classification for LSTs. So LSTs writ large seem or essentially share the same ETH pool, and they have that isolated to them. Uh, is VMEX in that category where the isolation is more categorical, where we have this LST grouping, so all rETH, stETH, wrap stETH would have their own lending pool, or is it even more granular in that there would be just the rETH ETH LP or the rETH ETH Beats Phi pool token?
Yeah, so we're isolated in the sense that the entire pool will be isolated. We don't have kind of like a nitty gritty E mode type of thing that's kind of granular on the asset level. Eventually, we probably will add something like that in. For now, we wanted to reduce the complexity and just kind of get the basic protocol out there. But I think the more controls you can have, whether it's asset to asset specific risk parameters, would be really cool to do in the future. But for now, we're just isolated on the whole lending pool, the whole lending pool basically. And so the assets inside of it won't be grouped by LSTs or any of that sort of stuff. But you could create an LST lending pool, and then in that pool you could customize your risk parameters for all the assets in it. But it'll be still kind of isolated to that overall pool, which you could think of as like a mini instance of Aave. Does that answer your question? Make sense?
Yeah, no, that definitely tracks. A follow-up question is, say a user was to, or this some semi-permission third party was to create a pool of various LSTs against ETH, and they wanted to fine-tune the parameters. Could they do that such that what degree of control would these individuals have? Is it just the typical lending curve, or is there anything new that you add to the mix that allows greater fine-tuning for lending pools?
Yeah, so we kind of use all the standard risk parameters. So there'll be borrow and supply caps, lending interest rate curves, loan to value, liquidation penalty. We also use a borrow factor, which Euler brought to market, which is kind of an LTV for the assets you borrow against it. And so the fine tuning will kind of be in those kind of generalized risk parameters, and then also allow for some customization with the Oracle as well. And so you could take, for example, like a new Oracle provider comes up, we review their stuff, we feel comfortable with their approach to oracles. They're a new Chainlink competitor, for example, they could use their own custom oracle as a way to kind of showcase that they have robust oracles, and we would probably work with them to set caps to be conservative, and then over time adjust them upwards and stuff like that. Eventually, kind of going back to what I was saying before with this E-mode thing, we would like to add more granular abilities to adjust risk controls, where you could do kind of specific based off using one asset as collateral and borrowing another asset or a group of other assets, how you could kind of fine tune LTVs based off the correlations of the assets and stuff like that. But we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, totally understandable, and good to see that just in the discussion for the future. Another question I had is, or would you be able to talk a bit to the security benefits of having the isolated system? One of the downsides of Aave's E-mode is, though it creates this like sort of overall structure, it also has the downside of exposing the entire pool to stETH. Last year, stETH famously had a major depeg. Oh, sorry, now 2 years ago, right? When was that? No, still last year. In May of 2022, stETH famously depegged by 10% at one point, causing mass liquidations across DeFi and causing a lot of harm. Had E-mode been popularized at the time, this stETH depeg may have had adverse effects to the broader ecosystem, even if you weren't holding stETH. Say you were just in the rETH LP, you might have been hit by these crazy changes in borrowing levels and things like that. So could you talk a bit about just why it might be beneficial to have these really isolated lending pools?
Yeah, at a high level, the goal really is that these pools basically allow for experimentation and supporting of high risk assets in kind of more controlled environments, such that if something does happen, like taking your example, it doesn't impact the whole protocol. It's totally isolated to this individual pool. And so you can think of the example of supporting new LP tokens that haven't been used in lending protocols before. We can create an individual pool for these tokens that are higher risk. They don't have a track record of being used in lending protocols. And we can set really conservative borrow and supply caps. And so we could say, like, okay, we'll only allow $1 million worth of collateral of this LP token based off its liquidity and how confident we are in this asset and the underlying assets. And then basically allow it to kind of prove out its track record. And over time, we can slowly increase the borrow and supply caps. And we can say, okay, now we'll make it 2 million, 5 million, 10 million over time, and eventually, fully open it up or leave some high cap on it. And so the idea is that if something did happen, it would be isolated to the pool that's in. And then because it's a new higher risk asset, we'd be super conservative on the overall protocol's exposure to the asset. And so it's kind of this like two-pronged approach to how we can isolate and mitigate risk, and make sure that the whole protocol isn't affected by some random new asset that we want to try and experiment with and support.
It's definitely important to keep the protocol's health in mind. Recently, famous Curve founder Mitchell, I don't remember his last name, has been borrowing quite intensely against his Curve position, and has led to some criticisms from other players about how this could lead to a situation of bad debt for Aave if the entire position had to be liquidated. Do you have any comments on how VMEX addresses bad debt and how it mitigates risks to the protocol writ large?
Yeah, so I think this.
Oh, and also any comments about the Curve CRV token situation and lessons you can learn from that?
Yeah, it's definitely it's really interesting situation, and part of it exists because I'm sure Aave has learned a lot over time. And when they initially set a lot of these things and didn't have borrow and supply caps, it allowed for some of this stuff that, they probably wouldn't let fall through the cracks now. And so I think there's a lot of really great lessons to learn with it. That kind of goes back to when you add an asset for use as collateral on a protocol, you have to be very careful and take into account what the liquidity profile of the asset is. If you support an asset with no caps on it and someone deposits $50 million worth of the asset as collateral, but there's only $5 million in liquidity on chain to actually liquidate the asset, you're obviously going to run into quite a bit of trouble if you have to liquidate the whole position. And so our approach for, we're kind of in a good spot in a way where we can study basically all the issues with past lending protocols. We can approach all these typical assets that people use in lending protocols with a fresh set of eyes. And we don't, carry that baggage of already having a bunch of people using these assets on the protocol. And so when we go to add an asset like Curve, we would basically look at what is the liquidity profile of this asset, and based off the liquidity profile, how much of an asset can we safely liquidate before it would cause bad debt on the protocol. This kind of goes back to our risk management framework and simulation tools we have for looking at this stuff. How much slippage is there to liquidate $1 million of Curve tokens, for example? And then we can basically set our borrow and supply caps for a given asset based off, actual on-chain data. So we're confident, that we can safely support the assets. And then basically you just have to watch them super closely. And if the liquidity profile for an asset starts to erode over time, you have to, take actions to mitigate risk for the protocol, whether that's, continuing to increase the LTV to slowly liquidate the position, or increasing interest rates to get people to, unwind their positions, and, pausing further borrowing and lending of the asset. So, in short, I think we can and have learned a lot from watching other lending protocols, and, approaching these things with more caution, and doing things slowly and not kind of rushing into things, and leaving more time for us to gain confidence and study how things, market dynamics play out before supporting them.
I love that answer. If we don't learn from the failures of the previous protocols, we're just going to be stuck in this repetitive loop of just launching new lending protocols that eventually get exploited or lead to bad debt. So I hope we do definitely learn from the past in these situations. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the future. As I understand it, VMEX will be launching on Optimism, but I believe has not launched yet. Can you talk a little bit about what plans you have for Optimism and how rETH can fit into that? As I understand it, rETH currently, despite its very high liquidity on Optimism, has very little leverage against it. Potentially a big opportunity there.
Yeah, so where we're at right now is we're planning on launching on Optimism sometime probably in early August. The protocol's all kind of finalized. We've gone through our official audit with Y Audit, Urin's auditing division, and then have done an audit competition on Hats Finance that we just wrapped up. And then I think on the 20th or so, our plan is to launch a second smaller competition to review all the final changes and kind of give us our final stamp of approval. And once that's finalized, we'll aim to launch an Optimism. So it should be coming up very soon. Stay tuned. Definitely learning that things take longer than you expect, as usual. But
definitely,
yeah. But yeah, our plans for rETH, and we've noticed the same thing. We're really excited to support rETH as collateral, and then also I think out of the gate we'll be supporting 2 LP tokens that are rETH ETH pairs. Velodrome rETH ETH and Beethoven rETH ETH, with that one staked in Aura to earn additional.
Ooh.
Yeah, so that's kind of
exciting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we've really mentioned it before, but a big focus with these LP tokens is supporting them staked in other protocols, or just staked in their own protocol. For Velodrome's case, the Velodrome LP will be staked to earn VLO and the Optimism rewards and all that sort of stuff. So users don't have to skip out on earning all the additional rewards they're used to by using the assets as collateral. if Convex was launched on Optimism 2, we would do the same thing for Curve LP, where it would be staked in Convex, but that opportunity is not there yet. And same thing with vaults, where there's urine vaults or beefy vaults that are really enticing and have enough liquidity to be safe for us to support. We can deposit the LP tokens into a vault to auto compound yield and all that sort of stuff.
I personally have a good chunk of my rETH currently in the BeatsFi beefy vault, auto compounding the OP tokens. And it's been a very high sustainable source of yield, I think averaging around 8 to 9%, which is well above the standard ETH borrow cost, right? So if you on VMEX can onboard that LP token, the arbitrage, well, not arbitrage, but the gap between the borrow cost and earning rate will be substantial. So I will be interested to see how the LTV evolves around that, because even with potentially relatively conservative LTVs, early users could be doubling or tripling their APRs. Well, semi-conservative if you want to triple.
Yeah, that's what's kind of interesting about the model is, we're not dictating who can and can't run a pool. So there's, so many different ways you can slice it. It can be a beats pool that has all the, the different beats, vaults in it. It can be a beefy pool. It can be something focused with Aura, or it can be rETH that goes across all the different, platforms. And you can have the vaults that are auto compounding. And like you said, I think if it's more of a rETH focused pool, you can then have more aggressive parameters if you're dictating that that's going to be in that pool is ETH denominated assets. So if you're just borrowing ETH against rETH LP pairs and you're just grabbing all of the rETH LP pairs across Optimism, then you can have much more aggressive parameters than if you're going to add in USDC in there as well. So you can do that, and then let the market will decide where the ETH kind of borrow rate lands. But that can, you just have to source that kind of the ETH depositors on the other end. So what is the attractive return for ETH depositors as borrowers? That was still provides enough meat on the bone for people who want to leverage into that. So definitely something I think is pretty cool. Like I said, you kind of slice and dice these things however you want, and then if it's a low barrier of entry to launch a pool, then people can try different things, and you just see where the market deploys the capital.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. On that topic of figuring out how to source ETH liquidity in something like this situation, how does do you have a standard curve for the interest that a user would earn from depositing, or is it custom per pool that users can create?
As in the interest rate curve for so we use the same model that Aave uses for interest rate curve, and so it's based off the utilization of the assets and the slopes we set for the interest rate curves, and so it's standard kind of kinked slope, where once you pass the optimal utilization for the asset being used, then your interest rate starts to go up very quickly to make sure there remains liquidity in the pool for people to unwind their positions. And so not too much new there. I do think there's a lot of room for improvements and interesting ways we could improve on that model in the future if we get to it. Of course, there's always a balance between taking the traditional battle tested approach and versus trying something new and having it not work. So for now we're using the standard approach.
It's a pretty reliable model to build off of for now. That's for sure. So you are currently planning on launching to Optimism. Do you have plans to expand beyond Optimism in the future, or do you think you'll remain Optimism centric? And also, why Optimism?
Yeah, so we definitely have plans to expand beyond Optimism. Where we go next is not determined yet. there's a lot of interesting stuff on Arbitrum where we could see ourselves going to Arbitrum next. Also, ETH mainnet, of course, has kind of the largest base of users in TVL and new protocols. So maybe we'll go there too. In what order, I'm not really sure yet. We'll kind of evaluate when we get to that place. And the decision making for Optimism is, we wanted basically to go somewhere first that is a little bit friendlier environment. There's less competition with other lending protocols. Kind of more blue ocean for us to expand into. And then also Optimism has a lot of protocols on it that we thought would be, the right fit for us to support. A handful of dexes that have a bunch of liquidity, Yearn and Beefy are on there. And so there's kind of just like a great base of protocols that we thought would be a good fit, that had assets that we wanted to support on VMEX. And so between those two things, we thought it'd be a great kind of starting point to showcase our unique use case and try out a lot of stuff and do some experimentation, and then kind of hone in and get a nice foundation, and then look to expand to other places.
Yeah, well, Arbitrum has like a lot of TVL. It is actually pretty concentrated into like GMX. So yeah, Optimism had, a nice, like Jay said, a nice, ecosystem of different things, and I think that's will help kind of show what VMEX has to offer if we can support more smaller pools, then do all our experimentation there, and then as we expand, we'll be more confident in kind of what we want to target.
Makes a lot of sense, especially as the op tokens runway, I believe, is going to be extended as more protocols apply for their next rounds, and the next ARB token allocation is still not yet set. So it's definitely a lot of L2 activity to come in the future. Can you guys talk a little bit now about how the protocol takes its fees, and about the VMEX token, if you have one or plan to have one?
Yeah. We take fees in kind of the standard way that lending protocols take fees, which is we take a share of the interest earned by lenders on the protocol. That's specific to the asset in question. Higher risk assets, usually we take a higher fee on, and lower risk assets are ones that are competitive across a bunch of lending protocols. We take pretty negligible fees on, like USDC, for example. And then those fees will basically go to the DAO, can be used to backstop reserves. If there is bad debt that accrues, we can use fees earned to backstop them, or be used to pay contributors and expand work on the protocol and all that sort of stuff. So pretty standard model for lending protocols. And then for VMEX token, we do have a plan to launch a VMEX token. When we'll launch it, not exactly sure. It'll depend on how the protocol is doing and when we think is a good time to launch it. And so the exact function of the token is a little up in the air right now, but we have some cool ideas around it where we want to take more of a revenue-based token emissions approach, where we're not just minting tokens into markets kind of arbitrarily and wasting a bunch of VMEX tokens when we launch it, but instead kind of focus on the pools that are really earning revenue for the protocol, or strategic that we think in the future will earn revenue for the protocol, and then basically adjust the token emissions based off that, and kind of take more of a data-driven, revenue-based approach instead of this more arbitrary minting into markets approach. And then there'll be some staking features around the token, where we'll probably do something around you stake the tokens and you earn some form of multiplier point over time, and that multiplier point will give you boost on the emissions that you earn in the by participating in VMEX. So we'll take some approach there. Probably it's not locking tokens. We think it's pretty inefficient and not kind of the best way, and not the best user experience for a new protocol to have people lock up tokens for a bunch of years.
Especially without the liquidity directing aspect of it. I think taking that out of curve context is usually pretty silly. But yeah, as you were saying.
Yeah, totally agree. And so, we want kind of the same benefit of, incentivizing people to not sell tokens. And so one way to do that is just, kind of do the inverse of what curve lock is doing, which is, decaying your boost over time. Instead, it's just the longer you hold the tokens, the more boost you get. And so it's kind of a nice incentive for people to hold on to their tokens. And yeah, as we get closer to the token and as we launch, we'll definitely be posting a lot more information on the approach to the token, and we'll be looking for feedback from the community and other people who have opinions about this stuff to make sure we're taking everything into account before we launch it. But that's kind of the high level structure. John, too, I'm not sure if you want to fill in any details there either.
Yeah, a lot TBD. I think how you laid it out is, as we start, obviously the core principles are not just admitting it to admitting it. We don't want just, empty TVL. We're hoping that the product stands on its own and can attract, TVL even without token incentives. But then obviously you want to, attract, the future kind of governors of the protocol. So bringing people in, rewarding them for being depositors using the protocol, and then having appropriate, incentives for them to continue to hold, we think is important, as well as incenting people to hold LP and keep deep liquidity wherever we have the protocol deployed. I think one of our big questions is also just how to kind of manage the token across networks. So I think we'll probably start with things fairly simple and then build things out from there as we decide how the protocol is going to look when it's on Optimism and Arbitrum and mainnet and wherever else it may go. So I think on the one thing to mention on the governance side is we want to get past the whole, okay, you hold this token, you now decide the specific borrow parameters of this asset. That just seems incredibly inefficient. So that's where building out this tooling, and we've been working with a developer on building out specific tooling for pulling on-chain liquidity data to kind of put into these decisions, is getting to the point where people could maybe just token holders can just vote on a framework for how parameters are set and managed, and the protocol, whether it's having to have some manual intervention based on alerts and things, or eventually maybe having it be fully automated, all of that can just be stripped away to where there's less decisions being made, and then there's the governing body is more just deciding that, hey, this framework kind of makes sense based on available data, and then we use the data to kind of tweak those parameters. So yeah, don't want to have holders have to kind of do due diligence on every little asset. Hopefully we can kind of get past that. But like I said, simple to start, and we're excited to see where it goes.
It's very strange that we've seen a lot of protocols move towards increasing how much governance there is with tokens in recent years, which is like the exact opposite of what we want in crypto in a lot of ways. Like the token is there to kickstart flywheel incentives. It's not there for governance. The crypto wasn't created for governance. It was created for self-sustaining flywheels and self-sustaining systems. And I mentioned Steve earlier. The LDO token and its governance role is a big risk to Ethereum protocol security. And if we can get to the ideal state, we would have protocols like VMEX that have little governance aspects, and most of the actual facilitation is automated. So great to see that is the general principle you guys appear to be operating on. And in terms of liquidity and the tokens, I'm a big believer in starting small and being data driven. We in Rocket Pool started with a small-ish amount of incentives and then ramped up and are continuing to ramp up as we learn more and more about what has been working and what hasn't been working. So yeah, I wish you guys the best in the token launch. Do you guys have anything to add now in closing thoughts? It's been a wonderful call, and I think the the Rocket Pool community will have a lot of new opportunities with VMEX in the future on Optimism.
Yeah, it's been an awesome call. Thanks so much for having us on and for all the great questions. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I guess in closing, just stay tuned for updates around launch and lots of exciting stuff coming, and a lot of different assets that I think will be pretty exciting for people to start playing around with, our ETH and our ETH LP pools. And definitely follow us on Twitter, hop in our Discord, and if you have any ideas around assets to add or risk framework or in general thought any things we're just talking about interesting, then definitely hop in, ask questions, share your thoughts, all that sort of stuff. So we definitely want community contribution in building this, because you guys in the community are the ones using the protocol, so absolutely want to hear your thoughts on what you think is the best structure. But yeah, that's all. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you having us on.
Thank you guys for joining us. Jonto, did you want to add anything?
No, all good. Yeah, really appreciate you having us on. Like I said, Jay said, follow us on Twitter, hop in the Discord, and we'll be socials in Discord, but things will definitely be picking up in the next month or so. So come check it out.
Great, amazing. Thank you guys so much. And if you're listening, make sure to check out VMEX Protocol. Maybe the future of lending on Optimism. Let's kick it back now over to Nick Ashley, our community manager, as we switch over to the second half of today's call.
Hello, I'm back. Quite a bit to discuss, I think, this time around.
Yeah, and we have some breaking news from just today, I believe we'll be covering.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been one of those days for me. Lots of bits and pieces kind of ticking away behind the scenes, trying to keep on top of it. So it's good that we've got a new ecosystem lead, Grant, who is slowly getting up to speed with Rocket Pool and the ecosystem, which is no easy task, because as soon as you learn about one piece, something else grows out. It's all go still.
Could you tell us a little bit about what Grant's responsibilities as ecosystem lead will be?
Sure.
What's the day-to-day going to be like?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll preface this by saying that we do intend to get Grant on as a guest so he can hear all of this firsthand. I'm guessing maybe towards the end of the month, but essentially it is to carve out a good bit of the BD work that I've been doing as part of my everything that's not technical role, and allowing me to focus a little bit more on the marketing and community sides of things. One I think that Rocket Pool is going through is, if you look back over the past, is it 6 months, give or take, a bit more, maybe 9 months, the speed that the protocol has been growing and some of the milestones along the way, like the Chainlink price feed, a bit of foreshadowing there, have kind of kicked off a number of integrations that were kind of, I suppose you could say, passive from the Rocket Pool side. But going forwards, I think there's going to be an increasing need for more active BD work, kind of ongoing relationship management kind of stuff, and potentially branching out into areas where we traditionally haven't been that involved, whether that is like institutions and the like. So short answer, it will be essentially a BD role, but the job title is called Ecosystem Lead.
Got it. Will we be seeing Grant on a Twitter Space anytime soon?
Yeah, the idea is maybe sometime towards the end of the month. I think we have a guest for the next week, if I recall correctly, but not a whole lot locked in, at least for for future weeks. So it could be around the 26th or so. So watch this space and keep an eye out in, of course, the event section on Discord.
Great. Looking forward to working with Grant. Honestly, my group chats have been stand recently too, so having him around is probably going to help everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on the topic of events in Discord, we have an AMA with Spool in a couple of days. That's just a bonus AMA for this week. And we may be having 2 panel appearances from Langers that hopefully we can confirm tomorrow morning, or I guess later this morning, Australian time. So, keep an eye out on that event section. The calls and the details may be added relatively late notice, but yeah, please come along and help to support Langers if those panels come together.
Good to hear it. Good to hear it. So moving now on to some of the breaking news I mentioned earlier, and that Mav had foreshadowed. RPL has now officially gone live with a Chainlink price feed on RPL USD for mainnet. And this is a pretty big deal. So RPL's current Oracle is only Uniswap v3, meaning most lending protocols, most dApps, have not been able to integrate RPL safely. And for the most part, Rocket Pool as the protocol was fine with this, since RPL's main purpose was to be staked rather than to be used in DeFi. But what recent months have showed is that the lack of DeFi utility have led to occasions where the RPL liquidity has fallen off a cliff into just like no one can sell anything without causing massive slippage. And this is obviously horrible for protocol UX, because if you want to stake a token, you have to first buy the token you want to stake. And if there's no liquidity to do that in, we got a problem. Fortunately, liquidity has increased for RPL thanks to random market participants. And additionally, we now have, as of today, the RPL USD Chainlink price feed. So this should, first of all, allow protocols easier integration. Secondarily, increase RPL volumes of trading. And as a tertiary effect of the prior two, increase overall RPL liquidity. So this is just a huge milestone for the protocol. And as we had a renaissance some 9 months ago on the back of the rETH Chainlink feed, perhaps now we see a similar but not quite as potent renaissance in the coming months.
Yeah, it will certainly be interesting to watch that develop. And I think, it's important to reflect on the approach that's kind of been taken when it comes to the RPL token over the past few years, even down to things like centralized exchange listings, market making, and the like. RPL is a little bit different to many other tokens out there, in that it does have a use case within the ecosystem. It is not just another governance token. So as you've just said, Jasper, people need to acquire the token to run mini pools with Rocket Pool. So making it easier to acquire that token is always a good thing. In the past, I think that kind of fact that there is a use case for RPL within the Rocket Pool ecosystem has kind of led to the decision-making process of, we want to encourage people to purchase and use the token, not to necessarily speculate on it or purchase it for the purpose of using it in DeFi. But in this case, when we're talking about unlocking the ability to lend RPL, there is certainly some interesting use cases, and it can link in with RPL's role in the ecosystem. Potentially people may want to borrow RPL for a short or a longer period of time. And similarly, on the other side, it allows people who are holding RPL but not putting it to use for whatever reason to do that and to earn a return. So we have had certainly reports from time to time in Discord, on Twitter, people reaching out saying, "Oh, I've got a lot of RPL that I want to put to use, but for whatever reason they're not or can't run a node." And similarly, people who have a demand for RPL. So yeah, great to see the kind of ecosystem there expanding, and it'll be interesting to watch the kind of uptake for the RPL token.
A few important things about this. It's important to note that RPL, though it now has a CL feed, I don't believe it will be listed as collateral in Aave, which is actually quite useful for us in the ecosystem because, as you mentioned, we don't want to encourage speculative use. So since RPL can only be borrowed, we have a strategy that Mark Zeller himself has popularized and has been his impetus for getting RPL onboarded, and that is the ability to remain mainly RPL neutral and still participate in the ecosystem. You can do this by depositing rETH or ETH or even USDC if you, for some reason, wanted to do that, and then borrowing the RPL required to run the mini pools. In doing so, you allow the previous speculators who deposited their RPL into Aave to participate in the Rocket Pool ecosystem. Further, if you are participating in this system as the node operator, have now enabled yourself to earn a spread. So instead of just earning the RPL APR and having to take the RPL price risk, now you can just look at the RPL borrow fee and the RPL APR from staking and focus on just that. You don't have to worry so much about the RPL volatility because you're not going to be losing any of the RPL. You'll just be paying it back in the end, and your debt is denominated in RPL. So really, this is opening up a huge number of ecosystem participants into protecting the beacon chain and enabling a group of users who previously had no entrance, name being people who want to stake with Rocket Pool but don't want to have RPL price risk. So yeah, this is going to be huge on just so many levels. Definitely will be the basis of a thread soon.
Yeah, pretty great.
One question, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this or not. Did we have to pay for the CL feed? I know it is generally standard practice to do so, and it's also generally standard practice not to discuss payments or non-payments of it, but I'm just wondering if you had any information that you could share.
I saw that question too. This is something that I've been out of the loop of. It is unfortunately a question for Langers. We can ask him during the next community call. What I did hear is that in terms of interacting with Chainlink, he said it was a little bit challenging in terms of getting information from them or getting them to send through documentation and everything that's involved. I believe that Chainlink have been, if not already, moving towards a paid model for this specific price feed. I'm not sure, on whether there is a fee. I wouldn't be surprised if there was, but it is something we'd have to get some clarification from Langers about.
I was expecting there to be a fee, and in my recent proposal on the forum, I actually suggested that the RP DAO put the bill for the listing on Chainlink. So either way, great news. Was just curious. But moving on now from Chainlink, I hear that you have joined the Nexus Mutual community call recently, and that they've been pretty receptive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was actually just a few hours ago in the Nexus Mutual Discord. There is an NMPIP, I guess is how you pronounce it, it's been up for a little while, proposing to allocate a decent chunk of ETH to liquid stake with Rocket Pool, 14,400 to be precise. And
just a little dust.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is about to commence shortly in terms of the on-chain governance vote on the 12th. I'm assuming that's probably US 12th, so maybe a little way to go. But yeah, just mostly sharing an introduction to Rocket Pool, what exactly the protocol is. The proposal itself is quite straightforward. It doesn't necessarily need a lot of explanation. But yeah, call went well. There are a few of their community members along, and it was a good opportunity to kind of share about what Rocket Pool is doing to make sure that when a DAO or any entity liquid stakes with Rocket Pool, not only are they earning a return, but more importantly, they're helping to secure the network, contributing to decentralization, helping to ensure that the blockchain remains incredibly neutral and free from censorship, which is also pretty important. So yeah, thinking beyond just the numbers there does seem to be pretty well received, but you never know when it comes to on-chain voting. Sometimes some of these DAOs, the power can be divided up in interesting ways. So have to wait and see. Fingers crossed.
Every milestone we get with one of these major DAOs diversifying their treasuries towards Rocket Pool is a huge milestone in enabling future DAOs and treasuries to doing the same. Nexus Mutual is one of the largest treasuries, so getting them to diversify towards us would be a huge, huge scalp and definitely help similar causes going on in the ecosystem. Cough, cough. Mantle slash BitDAO. uh, but yeah, we can't expect everyone to hear or be rational, apparently. Diversifying your treasury between LSTs is the most economically rational thing to do, since the disparity between the yields is relatively small and the discrepancies of risk are relatively large. With Steve, you don't want to get too far into this, but you do have relative amounts of censorship risk due to the DAO structure and also the very limited node operator set that isn't less present, if at all, within rETH. And so having a diverse portfolio is just protecting the treasury from these tail risks. So great work, Matt, on getting the word spread to Nexus Mutual. And hopefully this is a catalyst for the rest of the treasury community to do the same.
Yeah, you're right in that every little bit counts. There is certainly a lot going on out there, but I think Rocket Pool's presence in the market is built up slowly over time in an organic way, and goes through multiple small actions that we all take, whether that is engaging with DAOs or content out on social platforms, or even having the guests in like we do on these Twitter Spaces each week. Each individual item, it may not be some big flashy advertising expenditure, but it does accrue over time, and it is something that you can't just buy. If you keep an eye out on new protocols that launch, you may realize that despite the funding and the VC backing, you can't kind of buy genuine engagement and kind of integration within the DeFi world overnight. It's something that only happens with time and with in Rocket Pool's case, a genuine solid product. So yeah, that's also important to keep in mind.
Yeah, having 3,000 node operators as a community is definitely useful, I must say. Similar news, the Nouns DAO Treasury has previously voted to diversify through rETH through a time-weighted automated market maker that was being developed by a third-party group. That third-party group has since launched the new protocol for TWAP exchanges for treasuries, and has also seeded the 100K rETH necessary to enable the trade at low slippage. This TWAP protocol that launched is fairly really interesting. There was a lot of discussion about it in trading, whether it was a net useful addition or not. But what it will allow treasuries to do if it gains popularity is to make relatively large transactions with relatively low liquidity. And if we are to pursue these sort of upper highest echelon of treasuries, something like this might be a pretty useful feather to have in our cap. So glad to see that the first transaction is going live, and I wish them the best. Perhaps they might be pivotal to our treasury expansion in the future. Definitely a good relationship to build.
Yeah, we've talked about nouns off and on over the past few weeks. I think there was at least one, maybe two AMAs with them. I can't remember if they were these community calls that we hosted, but I do distinctly recall jumping on one of their AMAs. I think Jasper, you and or Whack and some others may have joined too. But yeah,
Whack did.
But yeah, the nouns guys seem like a great group. So it was good to see this initiative, which has kind of been ticking along for a little while, come to fruition.
So here's a topic that was actually new to me, and that is the Raft protocol has reduced their fees for the rETH token. So this is pretty cool. Raft is a stablecoin protocol built around various liquid staking tokens, and had recently onboarded rETH, and now seem to be doing a promotion to increase rETH usage. So if you're already in the Raft protocol, if you have, I believe their stablecoin is called R, consider switching your CDP over and potentially saving some fees.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the dynamics play out in the liquid staking token collateralized stablecoin space. We've had a few of these protocols on, including Raft as guests. It seems to be a pretty rapidly growing field. And of course, with that, you get a lot of competition, different ways of approaching the same product. At the end of the day, it's probably likely that there'll be a smaller number of successful protocols, and the step by Raft, it seems to be a pretty good one in terms of making them look like a more attractive option for anyone wanting to put their ETH to work in this way.
Of course, we also have our own homespun, well, semi-homespun, liquid staking token-based CDP, and that is Gravita. Gravita just announced in a very humorous fashion on the Discord that they are increasing the rETH cap to 5.5 million. Shout out to OX4Nex for announcing that Gravita would be increasing the debt cap in the Rocket Pool Discord before anywhere else, most specifically in the Rocket Fuel submissions channel. So if you want to keep updated on everything in the ecosystem, make sure you are following Rocket Fuel submissions.
Yeah, this is very much breaking news, isn't it? I don't think it's even managed to make its way out to the Bird app yet.
Not yet, I don't think.
Yeah, 5.5 is a great step. Hopefully they can add 1.4 million as the next bump up once that is inevitably hit.
Can't wait for the 6.9 million. So we have Parallax protocol, and this is one I'm not very familiar with. Could you talk a little bit about Parallax?
Yeah, this is another one of these kind of out of left field announcements. I have been chatting very briefly to Parallax, just going through the usual steps of how we would kind of potentially work with them, whether they would want to go to the IMC or the GMC, whether we can do some co-marketing or Twitter space and the like. So yeah, this is a liquid staking strategy that they have announced that supports rETH. So it's possible to essentially have a DeFi position managed by Parallax Finance. Still very much early days, but they did announce this before getting in touch. So it's a little bit of a learning process, but you can find out more and do your own due diligence alongside me in parallel. Nice, non-intended pun there, from their Twitter account. But yeah, I guess just yet another one of many such examples of the DeFi world going to rETH as kind of one of those A-grade assets.
Right. It's definitely in the starting lineup for most new protocols launching, especially multi-asset protocols. So in the IMC world, we are continuing to flesh out and establish our L2 strategy. Once we settle on a ZK strategy, we will be enabling liquidity incentives on both ZK Sync and ZK EVM Polygon. Notably, I believe just yesterday, and I don't think this is on the Bird app either, the Polygon team added bonus rewards on the rETH pool on ZK EVM. So if you are a zero knowledge explorer, you can find some good yields for rETH on Polygon. However, the IMC again is still debating on the exact amount of liquidity it wants to give to ZK EVMs versus optimistic L2s. If this is a topic that you have an opinion on, definitely let us know in the IMC public channel your thoughts about which L2s you use, where you would want to see rETH liquidity, would be pretty helpful for us as we make our decisions.
I think we're coming towards the end of the discussion points for this call. There have certainly been some other developments in Discord, on Twitter, in terms of how do we say this? Don't like to necessarily name names, but other ecosystem participants. So there's caused a little bit of activity recently with people engaged in spirited discussions in Discord and on Twitter. It's been a busy week for that kind of stuff. Certainly kept me and I'm sure Cron busy watching carefully. But I guess, at the end of the day, not necessarily a topic we want to go into too much or devote too much time to on this call, but important to, I suppose, reiterate some of the themes that we've discussed to date in terms of the safety and security of Ethereum, its ability to continue operating as a credibly neutral blockchain without threat of censorship is where most of the concern is coming from. I obviously can't speak for the Rocket Pool community, but based on what's been shared, it does seem to be the overwhelming reason for these discussions, and it is pretty important at the end of the day. As I said earlier, kind of it's why we're all here. It's a key part, or that might have been on the Nexus Mutual call actually, but it's the reason that blockchain technology is what it is, right? Rather than just another centralized financial product. So, I guess that's all I'm going to say about that. But certainly has been, I suppose, a noteworthy topic over the past few days.
The Rocket Pool community definitely care about protecting Ethereum and Ethereum's users. And I believe much of the recent discussion was coming from that as a place of origin. If you do want to learn more, WAC put out some amazing coverage on the issues in his Rocket Fuel episode. So definitely give that a check if you want to learn more. And with that, I believe we have covered all the topics for today. At the start of this call, we were joined by VMEX Finance rather. They are a novel lending platform that will be launching on Optimism and will be able to take advantage of some of the rETH strategies that are on Optimism that are high yielding in a isolated lending market. This will enable folding for the Velodrome or BeatsFi pools, and also just bring a lot of utility to rETH and the Optimism ecosystem, where rETH has had good liquidity but relatively little usage. After that call, we switched topics and we went into some of the updates for the past week. Their main story from today was the RPL USD Chainlink feed is now live on mainnet. This will enable just a huge variety of different integrations and also just bolster the sustainability of the Rocket Pool protocol into the future, as now we have a DeFi utility that will support RPL liquidity by proxy. We also talked about the ongoing efforts to convince treasuries for DAOs and more to allocate towards rETH. Mav has been working hard with Nexus Mutual. Nouns DAO have recently moved forward with the 100K rETH transaction with their time-weighted AMM. We also talked about CDPs and how Raft protocol has reduced fees on rETH, and Parallax Vault has recently opened up with support for rETH. In the world of L2 ZK EVMs, Polygon has added bonus incentives. I highly recommend everyone check out if they are exploring. And we will continue on the IMC to discuss and plan for other expansions. There has been some intense conversation in trading, as I mentioned earlier, but definitely worthwhile to read and be aware of. Anything else you want to add, Mav?
I guess just again to reiterate the calls that we have coming up. Not everything is in the event section on Discord yet. There are a couple of panels that Langers may attend that we have yet to add, so keep an eye out on that, and please head along, assuming they go ahead and help support Langers and Rocket Pool. But otherwise, we will catch you probably for the bonus AMA later this week with Spool.
Awesome. Thank you all for listening in. And this is Jasper checking out from his first week of med school. Thank you for joining, and have a good day.
Thanks, Dr. Jasper. Thanks, everyone.